Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our July 15th, 2026 Board of Douglas County Commissioners 5:30 business meeting. For those of you with us in person, paper copies of the agenda are available on the table back there by the doors you entered, and a full packet with all materials is available on our website. Reviewing the full agenda, first we will consider our consent agenda. We have a total of 3 items on that this evening. After that, we will move on to general public comment. We welcome general public comment for addressing issues that are not on today's agenda, but otherwise related to county business. Given our limited time and the need to have an orderly and efficient meeting, we do apply certain rules regarding public comments. We will do our best to enforce those rules consistently and without regard to the point of view expressed by the speaker. Each speaker will be limited to a total of 3 minutes of speaking time. However, we will accept public comment of any length in writing. Individual speakers may not donate unused time to other speakers. All comments must address topics within the jurisdiction of the County Commission. And we reserve the right to mute and remove any speaker whose comments are threatening, aggressively hostile, or belligerent. Campaigning for public office during the public comment period is not allowed. Please give your full name and residence for our meeting minutes, if comfortable doing so, and please address your comments directly to the Commission. We will hear from people who are here in person first, then we'll look to our Zoom meeting attendees. Please plan to use the raise your hand function if you wish to provide your public comment virtually. Please also know that comments received by the Commission during our meetings do not necessarily represent the views of Douglas County government, but we value the input. We don't usually respond to general public comments on the spot, excuse me, but if you leave your contact information with county staff, we will try and get specific questions answered. After general public comment concludes, move on to our regular business agenda for tonight. There are 3 action items on our regular agenda, or 3 business items, I should say. For each action item, we will hear from staff or an applicant, followed by questions from the commission, and then we will open the floor for public comment that is relevant to each item at that time. Once public comment is concluded, we will bring the item back to the commission for further discussion and a vote on action items. Lastly, a recording of this video of this meeting will be available on the YouTube's page and website. With that, commissioners, do we have anybody who would like to take anything off the consent agenda for further questions?
I do have questions regarding both of these CUPs, 2.1 and 2.2.
Okay, so Commissioner Anderson would like to pull 2.1 and 2.2. Any others from commissioners? Is there any member of the public who would like to pull anything from the consent agenda? Any raised hands online, Sarah? Okay, I'll bring it back to the commission for a motion on the remaining item.
Motion to approve consent agenda item 3.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, great. Commissioner Anderson, we want to start with 2.1 and whatever questions you have. It looks like we've got Drew with planning online.
Okay. All right, so for 2.1, a couple of questions that I have here are you're fine. I noticed that this particular CUP started out as a complaint. Can you talk about the complaint itself and why it's coming before us?
Yes. So this was the complaint is kind of a technical term. It was more, to my understanding, it was somebody driving by noticed that there was the garage door on the site was open and that there was a vehicle lift that they were working on a vehicle on, and they called into the Douglas County zoning office to see if that use was permitted in the zoning district. So Douglas County did some research. They found that it isn't permitted, but that would be with this small scale industrial use. So that is essentially kind of where it stemmed from. So there wasn't necessarily any sort of complaint, to my knowledge. There wasn't any sort of complaint for like noise or disruption. It was more so just somebody was checking in. It caused Douglas County to do research, and they ultimately found this non-conformity. So they're coming into conformance with this CUP.
Thank you, Drew. My only other question is that I noticed that it said that it is, or maybe it was the applicant that stated that it's a home business, but then I also noticed that it's being permitted as a small scale industrial. So I just thought that the classification of those two are not congruent.
Yeah, so with the small scale industrial use, part of it talks about uses that were established as a home occupation. And so vehicle repairs are allowed as home occupations in the county. So that's kind of where it stemmed from. But with this, they wanted to go through the conditional use permit. I'm sorry, automotive repair isn't allowed with as a home occupation, but they can apply for this small scale industrial use that it falls under. So that's why it's kind of, it was just noted that they do this as because they live on the property as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't have any other questions for this one.
Any other questions from other commissioners now that we've opened up the floor? Okay. I think, yep, we'll close one and take a motion on it, but let me first open up public comment. Anybody wish to make public?
Applicant want to speak?
Oh, thank you, Commissioner Willie, for reminding me, since this is a planning item and we pulled it, do we have an applicant present that would like to make any comments?
I do not believe that they were able to attend tonight.
Okay. I think that sounds like Commissioner Anderson's questions are satisfied. So I think we can just move forward with public comment. Seeing no takers in the room, any virtual hands, Sarah? Okay, I'll close public comment, bring it back for a motion on item 2.1, commissioners.
I really value when folks are willing to kind of come into compliance with our regulations. And this is one of the things I really like about our zoning and codes department is that they really work with folks to make that happen. I'm happy to make a motion if you're ready. I move to approve the conditional use permit UP-25-0008 for a small-scale industrial use located at 1093 East 2400 Road, based on the findings presented in the staff report and subject to the conditions listed in the staff report, and adopt resolution number 26-10.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All right, 2.1 passes unanimously. All right, moving on to 2.2. Drew, are you with us on that one too? Or, oh, it looks like we've got another planner with us.
My only question on this one is that, and this might just simply be an error, but it states that change the existing use from equipment storage, heavy detached dwelling to current existing use as residence detached dwelling. Because I think that what you're actually wanting to do is to use it as equipment storage, but it's stating that it wants to become a detached dwelling. So I'm wondering if there's a typo in the plan resolution for the project summary of the site plan.
I am working on getting that pulled up here real quick so I can see what you're seeing and looking at. My name is Avery Kerner, and I'm one of the planners with the City County Planning Office. Let's see.
And I would have mentioned this earlier, but I didn't notice it until about an hour ago.
Okay, so listed on, so it are is what you're looking at the condition 5A.
Yes.
Okay, so on the site plan that was submitted for the conditional use permit, the plan itself shows that the existing use is equipment storage heavy, and that is incorrect. The existing and permitted use for the property is detached dwelling. And so that, as shown on the resolution, is correct. That would be a change to the site plan to accurately reflect the existing conditions.
So do we need to make changes before we approve this?
I think what I heard, Commissioner Anderson, and correct me if I heard you wrong, Avery, but I think what I heard is that condition updates what it corrects what is currently true, which is slightly different verbiage and not accurate. And so this condition that's before us to approve it will fix that. And so it's accurate.
Okay, thank you.
Correct, Avery? Okay, I'm seeing affirmative head nod. Great.
Okay, thank you so much.
Any other questions, commissioners? Okay, we'll open this up for public comment. Anybody wish to make public comment about this item? All right, see no takers. Oh, yeah, do we happen to have an applicant here for this one? I'm sorry.
do,
Thank you, Commissioner Willie, former planning commissioner extraordinaire, keeping me on track. If we have an applicant that would like to come forward, you're welcome to say more. Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, any hands for public comment, Sarah? All right, I'll bring that back for any further comments or questions for the applicant if there are any, or a motion.
I would make a motion. We're ready?
Great.
Okay. I move to approve conditional use permit UP-26-0013 for heavy equipment storage use at 1691 East 902 Road based on the findings of fact presented in the body of the staff report and subject to the conditions listed in the resolution, and adopt resolution number 26-11.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Great, passes unanimously. That we will conclude our consent agenda. Thank you, commissioners. Thank you, applicant, for being here. Thanks, Drew and Avery. We appreciate you. And with that, we'll move on to general public comment. As a reminder, this is an opportunity for public comment about county business that is not on today's agenda. We have 2 revenue neutral hearing rate agenda items tonight, and then our Douglas County land use and diagnostic review for zoning and codes, just as a reminder. So anybody who has public comment about anything besides those things, please come forward. And if you're listening online, a reminder to raise your hand so staff knows that you'd like to make comment. Thanks.
John M. 66049. I'd like to talk about the whole budget, not the 2 pieces that are going to come up later. So if you don't mind, that's what I'm going to speak myself to. Haven't been in all the discussion sessions, but I've been reading diligently. It's just scintillating reading all of these discussions. But there are county services that are core to county responsibilities. And these core items should not be cut or threaten to be cut, because that's where the money should be focused that is taxed. These items are infrastructure, and I know you know this, investments in roads, sidewalks, public transportation, and public safety, supporting law enforcement, fire departments, which enhance community safety and emergency responses. But the county budget, as stated, suffers from bloat. And when taxpayer money is directed towards non-core projects, several issues arise. Limited resources, there are fewer funds available for the essential services that I just spoke to. And that leads to deteriorating public infrastructure and services. And then, of course, there's a need to raise property taxes to cover the shortfall in funding for public needs. You should not be in a situation where you have underfunded roads and bridges, for example, as stated in the agenda item report. And I quote from the budget deliberation summary, the fiscal impact of remaining revenue neutral would result in a total reduction of 4.7 mil in the general fund, road and bridge fund, and employee benefits. That road and bridge fund is core to the county responsibilities. You are, in fact, in a situation of limited resources because you've devoted resources to non-core. Thus, you're faced a result of having non-neutral mill levy. Prioritizing funding that addresses core processing needs of the entire community should be primary. This approach ensures that taxpayer dollars are used effectively, promoting overall well-being. If there is any extra, then you look to funding special projects such as mental health, the homeless, other humanitarian related projects. I do not think it is correct to provide budget reports that claim to raise the mill levy in order to maintain the budget, for example, a core initiative such as road and bridge repair. That seems to me wrong and manipulative. Douglas County had the second largest decline in domestic migration, of any county in the state, according to Lawrence Journal World. Only Wyandotte had a larger drop. Increasing taxes simply drives citizens to move out of the county, especially if some of the core services are not provided as they should be. Wyandotte County also has high mill levy and high property taxes. My opinion, this budget proposal is not
What's
a
your
good
time,
look,
John?
especially during elections. Thank you.
Anybody else here who wishes to provide general public comment? Seeing none in the room, any virtual hands? All right. We will close general public comment and go ahead and move into our regular business agenda, starting with item 4.1. Sarah Brooks.
Here
Ann Brooks.
and commissioners, we've spent a lot of time over the last couple of weeks working on our 2027 proposed budget. I think Brooke has a few remarks, but we basically stand for questions. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah, and good evening, commissioners. Kansas law does require that all taxing subdivisions notify the county clerk of their intent to exceed the revenue neutral rate and provide the hearing information no later than July 20th, which is Monday next week. Staff comes before you tonight to seek authorization to submit that notice to the county clerk, indicating the county's intent to exceed that revenue neutral rate for the 2027 budget and establish a maximum levy rate of 40.286 mils for the 2027 Douglas County budget. And along with that notice, we will schedule the combined revenue neutral rate hearing in conjunction with the budget hearing and set that date for August 26th at the 5:30 p.m. business meeting. That's what staff comes before you tonight, and let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Brooke. Any questions for clarity for Brooke? Commissioners? Okay, thank you. With that, we'll go ahead and open this item up for public comment. If anybody wishes to make public comment about the revenue neutral rate hearing for the Douglas County budget, please come forward. Okay, any virtual hands raised yet? All right, we'll close public comment and bring it back up to the commission for any comments or motions otherwise.
So, we've spent a lot of time in this room and all of that is available online. Some folks were here in person. I just think it was a very thorough and very collaborative process. I was really pleased with the way that commissioners worked together. Nobody got everything they wanted, and that is the democratic process. And I'm really proud of the work that's been presented here.
Any other comments, commissioners?
Just echo that and happy to make a motion if commissioners are ready.
Great.
Make a motion to authorize staff to notify the county clerk of the county's intent to exceed the 2027 revenue neutral rate for Douglas County and to establish the required hearing date concurrent with the annual budget hearing.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Okay, unanimous. Thank you very much, commissioners. Brooke, welcome back to the podium. I'll
Thank
turn
you.
item 4.2 over to you.
Absolutely. So staff is also seeking authorization to submit that intent to the county clerk to establish the maximum rate for the Consolidated Fire District Number 1 2027 budget of 9.883 mils and hold both of those hearings on the same night as the county budget hearings. That's August 26th at the 5:30 p.m. business meeting.
Brooke, commissioners, any questions about this one?
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead. Who do you have a question for, Commissioner Dorsey?
Deputy Chief Hornberger?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. I think everybody concluded that you need all of the personnel in what was described as item A of A, B, and C. My question is there any thought to having a phased in approach for your hiring throughout the year, or do you expect all those people to show up on January 1st?
Our plan that we've put together internally is to hire the 6 firefighters as soon as possible. I mean, January 1, or shortly thereafter. And then prior to May or June, have the captains and chief hired. So within the first 6 months.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Took the words right out of my mouth. Thank you for being here. Any other questions for staff, commissioners? Okay, we'll go ahead and open this up for public comment. Anybody here who wished to make public comment on item 4.2? All right, see no takers in here. Any takers online? Okay, we'll close that and bring it back to the commission for any further comments and motions.
Even though this is a smaller overall request, this was a hard one because it is an increase that was the first that I guess we did have a small bit last year for CFD, but we've not done this with the county budget in the time that I've been here. So it was the need is very great. The need was very well presented. And that's when I had conversations with folks within that taxing jurisdiction, which CFD1 is not the entire county, not countywide, but just the northern half of our rural Douglas County. And many folks were supportive of that and certainly supportive of the need, but this was just a harder one, but I'm proud of where we landed and I know that they're going to do good things with it. I would make a motion if anybody wants that.
Motion unless any commissioners have other comments. Go ahead, Commissioner Lee.
I move to authorize staff to notify the county clerk of county's intent to exceed the 2027 revenue neutral rate for Consolidated Fire District Number 1 and to establish the required hearing date concurrent with the annual budget hearing.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right. Passes unanimously. Thank you very much, commissioners. Thank you, staff. We'll be continuing the budget conversation in a matter of weeks. With that, we'll move on to item 4.3. And Sean, am I turning this over to you to introduce? Or
yeah, I can just kind of kick us off. And hand it off as well here pretty quick. But tonight's presentation is an overview of the county's zoning and land use diagnostic review. Just as a reminder, the purpose of the review was to evaluate the county's existing zoning and subdivision regulations, identify what's working well, where improvements could be made, and opportunities to better align the regulations with our current development practices and the county's long-range planning goals. Just as a disclaimer, this is a diagnostic review, so there's no changes to the regulations being considered or adopted tonight. And at this point, I think I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Clarion Associates. Gabby and Elizabeth are here to kind of walk through a presentation, unless, of course, Carl has anything else to add.
Carl's here. Jake's off the hook for being IT.
Good evening, everyone, commissioners, staff, everybody who's here. Carl, thank you so much because we would have been here for a day and a half if I had to do that.
I just want to make sure you, yep.
Mike, this mic right here?
Yeah, just make sure you keep it with you because we need it for the record. Thank you.
Let's go over here. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. All right. I'm Elizabeth Garvin. I'm with Clarion Associates. I'm here with my colleague Gabby Hart. And we're going to walk through the presentation this evening. I understand the commissioners received a copy of the report for you to start going through. So tonight we're going to overview content and we're here for questions or follow-up that you may have. So let's see. Maybe. There we go. Okay, so as Sean started our introduction this evening, the diagnostic review is a look at the current regulations to truly make a diagnosis about how those regulations could be improved to make sure that the county is working with the best tools available to address land use development and changes over time. So it's a comprehensive look at the county's zoning and subdivision regulations. So that's County Code, Chapter 11 subdivision and Chapter 12 zoning regulations. It includes recommendations for making those improvements, for modernizing, for gap filling, for putting the county in an excellent location to make future decisions. But it doesn't make any of those changes. So this review does not amend or adopt or otherwise change the existing regulations. It's the beginning of a conversation. And we say that at the beginning because some people do worry if this is out there, is this the county making those changes? And actually to get to that point is a longer process that involves more public engagement. So this is the starting place for what do we want to think about? We started this project with a series of goals that we were working towards in order to provide the recommendations for improvements. So first off, understand and identify the strengths and weaknesses of the current regulations, particularly those that might be outdated or restrictive standards that might hinder housing, economic development, or ag development. Second goal was to look at the zoning and land use regulations and understand how they do or don't align with adopted comprehensive plans, area plans, and specific land use plans. So that's the county and the county's internal communities. Assess the zoning administration processes under the city-county planning agreement. So are we doing this as effectively as we can and getting good outcomes from that shared process? Look at the regulatory consistency across the incorporated and unincorporated areas within the county. And then finally, provide strategic, actionable recommendations to modernize the land use and zoning regulations. I'm going to stop on that last one. Zoning and subdivision land use regulations have been recognized in the United States as a legal regulatory process for about 100 years now. And sometimes people wonder why a community would go to the effort of modernizing its zoning and or subdivision. But development changes over time, infrastructure needs change over time, communities change over time. And so updating the regulations, make sure that we've kind of aimed them towards the outcomes that the county wants to see as expressed through the planning processes. Here's the project timeline. It's always great to be, we're here at the end of the timeline. We've gotten ourselves to the point of having kicked off the project the last time we saw you, done issue identification, done the preliminary diagnostic review, and then the final diagnostic review. And tonight we're presenting the recommendations. Pardon me. After this, at the county's choice, at the board's discretion, next steps would be moving into some sort of code update. But that, again, isn't what this report does. This is establishing a roadmap if the county wants to go down that road. So in getting the diagnostic review together for you to take a look at, we went and spoke with and reviewed information, talked to people, and we wanted to tell you kind of what our big four were here. We looked at relevant plans and regulations within the county and within the county's constituent jurisdictions, state regulations as needed. So we got the whole picture in place. We got targeted stakeholder input. When we put together a diagnosis like we've done here, we want to start with the subject matter experts. So the information we're bringing to you is from the people who work with the regulations in ways that they can be improved to make them more efficient or effective for the county. For more broad community outreach, that would take place down the road in the project. So you've got ideas from the people who work with the regulations. Next step is to go out and talk with the community about what they'd like to see in the regulations. We did peer community research. So we looked at a series of counties that have some similarities with Douglas County. Those are identified in the report. And I think I've actually got another slide on those in a second. And then we looked at planning best practices. Best practices is a short form way to say regulatory approaches that other counties have used that have resulted in predictable or effective outcomes. Sometimes you want to be the community that's, inventing the wheel. And sometimes you want to know what you're putting in the regulations is going to get you to the outcome you're looking for. So we did do some best practices research primarily with those peer communities. So just a short look at some of the plans and regulations we looked at. We looked at Plan 2040, the Douglas County Food System Plan, the Adapt Douglas County Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, Transportation 2050, Wakarusa River Valley Vision and Area Plan, Douglas County Open Space, the Incorporated Community Plans, so Eudora, Baldwin City, Lecompton, and Edgerton, and some relevant sub-area plans. For those who are kind of joining this conversation now, we look at those plans because they represent set policy by those jurisdictions. Policy is what guides where we go with updated regulations. So we would look at any of the policies in any of those plans that relate to development in unincorporated Douglas County, or in some cases around, which is still unincorporated, but around the edges of the incorporated areas, to see that we're making recommendations that will further those policy statements adopted by the jurisdictions, yourself included. So our technical stakeholder input, and we held these meetings in January, the Douglas County zoning and code staff, and to say we held a meeting with them in January is an understatement. Your professional staff has been generous with their time and knowledge. They have shared with us both details about what can improve the code and anecdotes about what applicants experience as they're trying to develop in the county, all of which helped us build a picture of what's going on with the current regulations to help us make recommendations to move it forward. So their time was invaluable. Similarly, Public Works staff, Public Works and zoning and planning go hand in hand. You need one with the other. And so again, this was a place where we got lots of excellent input on the project. We talked to you and heard from you. And we have heard through County Manager's Office, other information that's come into the project. We met with the Lawrence Douglas County Planning Commission. We're meeting with them again next week to let them know what we heard this evening and share some preliminary feedback from this report. Heard from County Administration, met with Douglas County Open Space and Heritage Conservation staff, Township board members, and rural water representatives at an in-person meeting. Planning and Development Services from Lawrence, also Lawrence Douglas County, the shared group, Lawrence MSO, and the rural fire districts. So these are all kind of our super code users, people who are involved in the regulations on a regular basis and had valuable information for this process. After we did our initial round of meetings, you may remember we circulated an issue identification memo. So this was this first look at what we were hearing as we were starting to organize it into topics. This formed the origins of the diagnosis report, but it also gave us a place to dive in deeper. And some of these subjects, we've really peeled away some of the layers to figure out, we would hear, if we go back to using diagnostic as like a medical tool, we would hear a symptom, but really the illness was something completely different once we started moving into understanding that. So this was our first step at here's what we're hearing, and we'd like to find out a little more about some of these subjects. So our peer community research, it's the characteristics we used. And not every county and Lawrence has all of these characteristics, but you'll find many of them are fairly similar to Douglas County. So we were looking for places in eastern Kansas, and we were looking for communities that have a college or university. So if we go to Boone County, Missouri, that's Columbia, or Johnson County, Iowa, that's Iowa City. So that's some similarity there. Proximity to larger incorporated communities. So we've got kind of Miami coming in south of Kansas City. Larimer County surrounds pretty much Fort Collins, Colorado, so it's university and larger city. And then Sarpy County is just south of Omaha. Interest in ag land and natural resource preservation. So we really needed to find those places where we go from urban to rural to understand how that continuum affects how they regulate development. And then finally, we get into the diagnostic review. I'm going to sit for a little bit. Gabby's going to walk through some of the content, and then we'll both be back to listen to feedback or guidance or whatever you'd like to share with us.
Thank you. All right. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Gabby Hart. I'm a principal with Clarion Associates. So I'm going to give an overview generally of the diagnostic review that you received. And as another reminder, this assessment is meant to be a point-in-time document. It's not going to be continuously updated or revised. It is just a representation of what we saw, what we heard, and what we think the county could benefit from. So for the purpose of tonight's presentation, the review is organized into these key focus areas. And so those capture the broader themes that we identified through that regulatory review, stakeholder discussions, peer research, and planning best practices. So for each focus area, we've pulled out just one example in this presentation of a recommendation, just to really illustrate the type and level of changes discussed through the much larger set of recommendations. Those are only examples. Obviously, the review includes the exhaustive list. So as we go through these, we're not asking for the group to select an approach or indicate support for a particular recommendation. Some recommendations in this report identify more than one option for how you could address a particular issue. And the county could pursue one of the identified approaches, develop a different approach, or decide not to move forward with it through that future process. The first focus area that we found is to strengthen the policy framework for future land use in the county. So throughout our conversations, we really found that the county's adopted plans, as well as those comprehensive plans from the incorporated communities, contain really important direction and policy, but that it's not always easily translated into individual development decisions. Some of those plans are pretty outdated and need to be updated to better reflect the existing conditions. And because of that, it can be difficult to consistently determine where different forms of growth are appropriate in the unincorporated area. This section of the document also specifically takes a deeper dive into Plan 2040, the shared comprehensive plan with the city of Lawrence and Douglas County, and provides and how it could provide clear guidance for development decisions within the county, and how the county could better coordinate with incorporated communities regarding annexation, utilities, infrastructure, and just generally development near municipal boundaries. Our representative recommendation here is to create a future land use map specifically for the unincorporated area. There is an existing growth and development map, which is on the slide in Plan 2040. And that provides important countywide context, but a more detailed future land use framework could provide clearer direction about the types and the intensities of development that may be appropriate and may not be appropriate in different locations in the unincorporated area. That type of map could really help give property owners greater predictability before submitting an application. It provides staff and appointed officials with a more consistent basis for review, and it reduces the need to revisit fundamental county growth questions one parcel at a time. So the review recommends exploring this tool, but the geography, the land use categories, the actual definitions of what the land use category should be, all of that would require a substantial future discussion. Second focus area is aligning development with infrastructure and service capacity. So development in the unincorporated county relies on a combination of county roads, township roads, rural water districts, on-site wastewater systems, drainage facilities, rural fire and emergency services, a very large and complex combination of entities. And the availability and capacity of all of those systems can vary significantly depending on the location and type of development being proposed. So the review recommends a more consistent approach within the regulations generally to identifying infrastructure and service concerns early in the process, as well as clarifying the type of information that applicants need to provide in order to determine if they have adequate capacity, and also determining who will be responsible for any of the necessary improvements that may be required or long-term maintenance. Sorry, our representative recommendation here is to establish a set of adequate public infrastructure and service standards. So under this concept, development would be expected to demonstrate that roads, access, drainage, wastewater, fire protection, emergency access, and domestic water are adequate for the proposed project, or that identified limitations can be appropriately mitigated or addressed somehow. And this doesn't mean that every application would require the same types of studies or the same number of improvements or types of improvements. The future update would involve deeper conversations about determining which application types should be subject to that review. At what point is that at rezoning? Is that conditional use permit, site plan, all of the above? That is something to discuss as part of a future effort. The broader goal is to identify those issues before development is approved and to provide clearer expectations for applicants, the service providers themselves, staff, and decision makers. The third focus area is updating zoning, development standards, and land division regulations to better reflect county priorities. This is the broadest and the largest portion of the review in the document. So it includes recommendations related to everything from the use table, including conditional and temporary uses, standards within zoning districts, parking, landscaping, lighting, screening, environmental protection standards, subdivision design, and non-conforming properties. So it's really the catch-all for all of the regulations that shape development. And so those recommendations are intended to address areas where the current regulations may be unclear or they're outdated or difficult to apply, while also trying to create stronger connections between regulations and the adopted policies through all of those different plans. And so because this section does cover so many topics, our next recommendation is just one small example of a larger set of topics, but the example recommendation here is that The landscaping requirements could be updated within the site plan review process to better support natural resource protection and the long-term success of required landscaping. So potential changes there could include things like providing a credit for existing healthy vegetation or prioritizing native plantings, and really just ensuring that all of these landscaping requirements are appropriate for a rural county context. And so this recommendation is another good example of how the zoning regulations could more directly implement these adopted plans, including the county's goals related to water resources, landscaping, landscapes, and environmental resilience. But again, the specific standards, the plant requirements, what types of development it would be subject to would all need to be developed through that more intensive process. Fourth focus area is improving development review procedures, decision-making, and interagency coordination. So the current regulations contain a number of different application procedures, but the steps, review responsibilities, the notice requirements, who's making the decision, who is the decision appealed to, all of those paths are not always clearly described or organized consistently. So generally, the review recommends creating a clear overall framework that identifies which applications can be handled administratively, which require a public hearing, and how those applications move through the process to the final decision. It also emphasizes earlier coordination among applicants, county departments, the city county planning office, municipalities, townships, and service providers like rural water and rural fire, so that those significant capacity or infrastructure issues can be identified before an application gets too far along the process or is in the public hearing phase. So our representative recommendation here is to restructure the current site plan review process. And this is an example where the review identifies two potential approaches. One would make all site plans administrative while retaining a referral or call-up mechanism for projects that warrant consideration by the board, whether because it's complex or in a specific area. There could be criteria established for when things should be referred or called up. And then the other option would be establishing separate minor and major site plan procedures that have objective thresholds where those minor site plans are the administrative decisions and the major site plans go to the board. Either approach could allow relatively routine applications to move through a more efficient administrative process while preserving the ability to have that public review and that public process for projects that could create greater impacts. So these options are presented to frame those future discussions. You could select one of them, combine elements of both, develop a different structure. No direction on that choice is being requested from you all tonight. Just wanted to use it as an example of, in this review, we have presented options in several instances. And then our final focus area is just creating more user-friendly regulations. Even strong substantive standards can be difficult to administer when provisions are kind of spread out through the code, key terms are defined inconsistently, or the procedures require users to move back and forth between multiple sections to figure out what is applicable to their development. So the review recommends consolidating related provisions. It also recommends combining the zoning regulations and the county subdivision regulations, meaning pulling them apart from the city. In addition to doing things like adding tables, adding graphics, just really trying to make it a bit easier for everyone to navigate and to consistently interpret. And that is the overview of what I know is a pretty beefy document, but just wanted to give the highlights, and now we are happy to answer any questions you may have or take any feedback.
Thank you very much. We appreciate the highlights in the beefy document. Any commissioners have questions queued up?
Can you stop sharing?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Sarah.
I have quite a few comments when we get to that, but at this point, there's a lot, and we knew there would be. After something like this, do you generally recommend that like everything get tackled, or that there's a triage process for as communities dig into what needs to be managed first?
We actually do that on a case-by-case basis. In some communities, triage is where we go if there are a few things that you need to clean up right away. An example of that is in 2015, after the United States Supreme Court changed the law around sign codes, communities had to clean those up right away. And I think Kansas legislature has recently been doing fun things for everybody. So we would recommend that if there are things that you need to peel off and do right away, do those. And then break the rest of the project up kind of into more substantive pieces that go in order so you can see how code builds on itself.
As you look through our diagnostic, are there pieces that you pulled out? You say, these are some of the emergency issues, and I'll ask our staff the same thing, but did you notice any that you felt like this really needs to be handled right away and then manage the rest later?
So I think in Douglas County, what we saw was that the reason things kind of end up going sideways in certain situations when you don't want them to is almost from the lack of direction, from the lack of the future land use plan. It means that you're kind of trying to build a bookcase without the instruction guide. And so if you were to do something first out of the recommendations, and I say this as a code person, I would dive into the planning piece of it and do that future land use map, at least at some conceptual level, because that will help you make all your tools work better. If everyone can visualize this, this is the area in the county when we're going to allow more agricultural commercial uses. So we can have implement sales here, or something that relates to farming or ranching. Then we can start drafting regulations in a way that we think those uses are going to end up there and be more permanent in that location. And then that kind of flows down into what do the districts need to look like, and what do those use specific standards need to look like? And can we get to a place where everyone's comfortable with just having staff sign off on it because the regulations guide what needs to be there? So that would be my thought on that. I'm open to other people's perspectives, knowing that you guys are just digging into it.
Thank you. So when you look at some of the area plans, which are mostly within the city of Lawrence, is that the kind of future land use plan you're thinking about, or is there a different model that we really don't have here yet?
Yeah, so I don't know the answer to that, how it relates to the area plans. But future land use maps are usually future land use maps. So it would be that in thinking about what is county appropriate development going forward. So where might we see some county commercial? And that would get colored red, right? And you would draw that around an interchange, an intersection where you're going to have significant traffic and the roads are paved. So it is along the lines of the area plans or sub-area plans, but at the county level, it might have more cloud-like edges around it, because some of it depends on property owners. Some of it depends on, what the market is looking for in terms of housing demand or commercial demand. So, enough that everyone agrees this is a good use in a right location so that you guys can take that conversation forward.
And I guess conceptually, I'm thinking in maybe two directions. One is our truly rural areas, and then the other would be on the fringes of our incorporated cities, and how different those conversations always are. And I don't know if that means that those edge conversations are left to cities as they would annex property, or if that is that separate, or is it included in like a county land use map?
Yeah, no, you would want to convene conversations with the cities and be mindful of what the county is comfortable with in terms of its support for development in those areas. Those areas of city-county interaction are the most challenging areas to plan for over time.
Noticed.
And, there's always something that the city wants, and there's always something that the county wants. And so, I think sometimes the question is, what are the basics that we have to deal with? And usually in those places, it's infrastructure. What kind of infrastructure do we need to see over the next 20 years? And so you can do both the rural and the city-county conversations simultaneously, but you're absolutely right. You'll get different answers in both places.
The question, or sorry, go ahead.
Of the peer communities, you looked at how many use a joint city-county planning department?
I think you guys do. Boone County, Columbia may have joint.
Would you say generally they're separate?
Generally, they're separate.
Thank you.
Yeah, we were looking this up for another Kansas county the other day. There are only about 4 or 5 states that do the joint. So it's here, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Texas, Kentucky. So it's a model, and there are also other models out there.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I noticed in your permitted use table analysis, you have some recommended updates, and some of them do pertain to paved roads and/or chip and seal roads. In my particular district, I have 147 gravel roads. Some of your recommended updates pertain really specifically to limiting to paved road access. And so I'm curious, did you do an analysis across the district or for specific districts, how the limit to paved road access would impact some of our gravel roads and or our businesses on those gravel roads?
Yeah, so I think one of the challenging things about where the county is right now and what going forward looks like is you have existing conditions on the ground and you have future development. And land use code changes primarily affect future development. So in order to dive in and make some of the other changes in areas where you currently have gravel, where you can't get to paved, there may need to be another level of solutions in there, typically funding solutions to get to that place. To answer your question specifically, we spent time with Chad and his team trying to understand the positive and negative impacts of allowing that greater intensity of development along gravel roads and what it would mean to make a change like that. In terms of existing businesses, changing the regulations does not make them shut down. They might become non-conforming, which just means it was legal under the old regulations. We're going to recognize that under the new regulations, that business is fine. If it shuts down for some reason, or if somebody wants to change it to something more intense, that might become a discussion about, adding 20 more cars or 10 more trucks in this location might really cause problems. So that is a piece of how to handle what exists versus what's going forward. The goal of a code update, especially at this point in time, is not to put people out of business or move them out of their houses, but it is to recognize some of those development issues that are certainly causing problems that staff hear about regularly, and try to look at something different going forward. Does that answer your question okay?
It does. It absolutely answers my
Okay.
question. I just want to make sure that as we move forward, and as we consider the golden factors, that we're not creating hardship for those that are currently doing business, for their children that may want to grow up and take over their businesses and or expand those businesses, and that we're not going to be creating hardship for those families moving forward that do desire to continue any form of agriculture or agrotourism moving forward.
I think that's something really important to bear in mind when we did the Riley County Code update. Doing a county code when you're dealing with ag requires some really special local tools. So it's going to be looking at that more like you're thinking about on a lot by lot or, area by area basis and saying, what can we do for what's here, just in terms of making sure we're not adding to their burden of being here, but how also when we look at something that's not as developed, can we say, this shouldn't be repeated in this other location?
Can you talk to me a little bit or talk to us a little bit about where the dividing line is between a regulation review and policy changes? Because in some ways, when I read this, it sounds like you're asking us to revise Plan 2040. Things like a land use map would be, that's a very large policy change. That's not a regulation change. Some of the annexation requests in there, I mean, we don't currently have that kind of relationship. And I'm not saying we couldn't with some of our incorporated communities. When does it become, when do your recommendations move from being a review of regulations and code and making sure people can understand and what the use tables and updating the sign code, which is one thing, very technical in my mind, to something that's much broader, such as what the infrastructure requirements are for the entire county for development and how we would expect communities to get letters of approval or not for annexation? That is a huge conversation in my mind. So if you could talk like how you make that differentiation.
Okay, so you started with the policy question, so I'll start with that. Our observation is, so first off, we try, for the most part, when we write regulations, to stay in our lane, which is writing regulations. And you're pointing that out. It's totally cool. We almost always bump into things where we're like, hey, we can't do this thing because, we've worked in places where, we've had people advocate, let's put bike lanes everywhere. But our instructions from the plan are not to put bike lanes everywhere. And so without that instruction, we'll say, bike lanes go in where they're appropriate according to the transportation plan. So in the case of Douglas County, what we're seeing is that when applications come forward through like a conditional use permit, because of the uncertainty about what the future development should be in different places in the county, that you're using your statutory tools in a way that creates uncertainty for property owners and applicants, and maybe isn't the standard way to do that. So let's say we had a future land use plan that said some part of the county, which is generally ag, should really be commercial, like this imaginary node we had going. In that case, we probably wouldn't want to look at a conditional use permit. We'd want to look at a rezoning, right? And we'd put you in, ag commercial or mixed use commercial or whatever. And we would do away with that place of, hey, this permit might go away at some point in time because we know that we're putting the zoning in the right location. So we can draft the zoning districts that the county needs, but we know for a complete decision-making process, you all need to know that you're putting the right districts in the right location. So that's that missing detailed mapping part of it. I think that isn't necessarily an override or a rewrite of Plan 2040. It's you coming in with the next level of detail, which is kind of your prerogative as the county to say, yeah, we're good with all of this, but there are some, tier 2 or tier 3 policies or some thoughts about the future based on our understanding of existing infrastructure and extension of infrastructure. And those conversations we made sure that we had with Chad and his crew to think about, what could happen with infrastructure, where that could go. So we can do for the county this next level of detail, and that will help us as decision makers. And then underneath that, you filter in the, am I rezoning? Am I doing conditional use permit? Am I doing administrative review? Because we've all decided that this information aligns and it's perfectly okay for staff to go say yes to this project or no to it because it doesn't align with anything. So that's our observation about the higher level missing piece.
Can I just want to offer a little bit of a distinction between a future land use map from the city perspective versus a county perspective. And take it for what it is, but typically a county or a city will look at it parcel by parcel. Obviously, the motivation is to grow. It's a growth plan. When a county goes in from an unincorporated standpoint and looks at a future land use map, they're not necessarily looking at it from that parcel level detail. It's more of a pattern to say, okay, along a nodal, highway system, we could see infrastructure already being in place there. That's where you're typically going to find trunk lines for water. There's a large water line that goes down between the city of Lawrence and city of Baldwin as an example. So again, I don't want to necessarily have anybody think that this is overly prescriptive in terms of a future land use is saying this property is going to be this color on the map. That's certainly not the thought as I understand it to be. I think it goes more in line with this conversation about infrastructure and whether or not infrastructure is either available today or whether or not a city has a master plan often that says we're going to go in this direction. Another example would be a drainage basin, so sanitary sewer system. So there's certain areas that cannot develop because the cost is way too great in terms of putting in a lift station and running a force main and all these sort of conversations. So I think that's where I think the dovetail comes in between this future land use. What do we see for growth, but also recognizing where do we see areas that we don't want to grow or can't grow. So I'm not sure if that helps kind of color in, but I think it's just kind of valuable to have that different perspective in terms of, a city is looking at growing more often than not, and a county is looking to grow, but also looking to retain some level of rural character, which I looked through a zoning diagnostic that happened in 2000, and that was a very clear point back from the Horizon comp plan, where again, that's a continued conversation about rural preservation. We want to do that, but we also need to kind of reconcile with that juxtaposition it puts us in to say we also want to grow. And I think that's where Clarion's kind of gone through on these key recommendations and tried to break out more of these adaptive policy level conversations and very overtly said these are policy discussions that need to happen. And then we have more of the technical work, the tools that we're working with that may be dulled, but we can sharpen them, and this is how we could maybe do that. So not sure if that's helpful or not, but wanted to offer that.
So then from a transportation perspective, is the review recommending adding bicycle lanes to the county from a transportation perspective, not from a recreation perspective?
I'm not sure it's necessarily suggesting bike lanes at all.
Okay.
That's my random
Okay.
example. Put that
All right, because I
aside.
saw that, yeah,
Sorry.
that's
I'm
also in
sorry.
the plan. And then I see that improving safety infrastructure for bicyclists and pedestrians is in here. And then, yeah, you mentioned, so I was just trying to make sure that I'm following the thread and ensuring that I'm understanding where
You're following
some
me.
of these
I'm
pieces
here.
are tying together.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
But I think to that point, though, trying to have that type of connection is certainly part of the discussion. So transportation is a fundamental part of long-range planning to say, again, you have highway systems or interstate systems that already exist that have high capacity, high volume traffic corridors. We also make that distinction here in our county because we have townships that maintain roadways. So that's a really, I would say that's not everywhere does that. Not only in the United States, but also in Kansas. I think we all know that there's different types of local government control when it comes to roadways, but acknowledging that also goes hand in hand with land use. So if you increase the intensity on an area that does have gravel roads, who's maintaining that and how is that getting paid for? And again, those are all, I think, questions that we wrestle with staff to say, okay, so when we reference the golden factors, that's part of that consideration that you all go through, the planning commission and staff tries to look at to say, is this changing the character of the neighborhood, right? That's one of them. Adding 1,000 cars on a roadway that typically sees 5 would have an impact. And how do we consider that while we're considering all these other sort of ideas and goals and thoughts? So.
This may be too far down in the weeds for this discussion. And if it is, we can talk about it later. But I noticed Edgerton was on the list of cities. Are they getting close to the Douglas County line?
Yeah, so that map, actually, they have a future land use map that extends into Douglas County. I think it's acknowledging that's different. I'll just plainly say there are other cities on the border with Douglas County that could someday very quickly come across. You had a CUP on the agenda today that is a boundary with Johnson County. So those realities are here today. And again, this whole conversation is what are we doing today so that we can set ourselves up better tomorrow to have that conversation, because we know it's coming. And with the case of Edgerton, it's already there.
I'll take another. As you look at our community versus other communities, kind of for comparison, what did you find that we're regulating that we don't need to, or that is highly unusual?
Got anything?
I think that one of the most unique, I guess, to answer what you're regulating that is different, I would say what jumps out at me immediately in my brain is the temporary business use, the TBU process. But generally speaking, it's more so the city county planning office and like the development review process itself that is very unique because of this shared system. And not a lot of places do that, where you kind of have separate staffs doing different applications, but related to similar properties, and really having one group being kind of the research and kind of the knowledge base, and then the others just facilitating applications. So that was something that stood out to us as something that could probably be pretty challenging for applicants too, of trying to navigate that. And same goes for part of in the review, as part of that conversation about the adopted plans, we did a pretty deep analysis on which of the Plan 40 specific policies are county based and county priorities, so that, at the shared planning commission level, those, when you're talking about a county plan or a county application, you should be looking at those policies, not necessarily applying the city ones, because it's that shared system can be a really big challenge.
Do you recommend a split?
I don't know that they make recommendations.
I don't think that's in the scope of their work. It's not in the scope of their work.
So it begs more conversation. And I have a question specifically about that. And one is, how do other communities that have entirely separate bodies manage these edge conversations? Because you've mentioned like the ones on the edges of incorporated cities are the most difficult. How do they manage that conversation if they're not having it together?
So we've seen over the years a few different solutions. So this is an issue. So I've been planning for about 35 years. This is my second round with this issue. So it gets hot every now and then and it cools off a little bit. But in our experience, we've seen just really informal sort of, hey, can someone in this jurisdiction take a look at this other project that might impact you? We have seen shared zoning districts. So if Edgerton comes over and they have, 4 districts that they use around the edge of Edgerton, that Douglas County might say, okay, we'll share those 4 also around Edgerton. And usually you're creating some sort of urban growth area or urban coordination area. And I don't know off the top of my head how that competes or causes any problems within Kansas's extraterritorial jurisdiction. But as long as the county has zoned up to the city's border, I think the ETJ goes away. But this is me spouting law off the top of my head, so let's not do that. We have, and that's an approach that Larimer County and Fort Collins use also. So they have an agreement about the districts that can be used there. The trick with that is the provision of infrastructure at a level to serve what could be the intensity of city zoning districts, which might be, far more intense development than the county would want to see. So we worked for Billings and Yellowstone County, Montana, and they had a smaller set of shared districts, which they aligned with a longer-term annexation agreement. So the applicant would know what they could develop, but that wasn't going to happen until they annexed. So that gave them enough certainty to start selling some of the property, but it also gave the city and county a better understanding of how that annexation was going to take place over time. The only other example that I think I've seen are shared subdivision regulations, because that I think gets to the core issue, which is the infrastructure. So that is something that we've done for jurisdictions in Texas that we've worked with. And actually, there was one more that we're exploring with another county, which is only doing development at a county level, but requiring infrastructure easements, so that at some point in time, if that property is annexed, there's a clear path to move the infrastructure through that property. So there's not one way to do it. And actually, my guess would be, given that you have some developed and some undeveloped areas, you might want 2 or 3 different ways to do it, depending on what you're looking at.
Thank
you. Mm-hmm.
Determining if a split with the Planning Commission may not have been in scope of the work plan. But if it came out of the learnings with stakeholders, or it came out of the work that Clarion conducted, to Commissioner Dorsey's question, I think it's important for us to have the discussion with Clarion and to glean from them any learnings that they learned from our stakeholders, even if it was not a part of the goal of their work plan, if it was not in scope. They were not tasked with doing that. But if there's any learnings for this commission to glean, I would still like to know if that is something that you learned.
And we can certainly glean.
Let's glean.
And use that to inform discussions separately. So we can certainly glean, and staff has views on that as well. And we can certainly do that and bring that back before the commission for discussion at a later date if you want us to gather that work.
Okay, so we can't glean today?
Like, that's a rabbit hole and we're trying to stay at a very high level.
Okay.
And so I'd rather have that conversation separately and come back to it.
Okay, so if we could maybe have a executive summary or something, a summary
Yeah.
as to gleanings, learnings from that you have learned, even though it was not in scope, that was not something, a goal that came out of the project, which we're very much aware of, but just curious as to what you learned.
Yeah, I think that Gabby shared the extent of our observations, and we're in Sarah's camp. We didn't go far at all down that road, and there may be other implications hidden in there that would make that choice work out differently. So I think you would benefit more from that more robust conversation about it.
If I can, I just also want to just take an opportunity to say that we're all using the same tools. So regardless of where processes are going, the underlying point of this work was to identify the tools that we're using and how they work or are not working to implement the policies that you all have adopted. And I just we want to add to that a little bit too, that there's a difference between sort of an application, as it was talked about earlier, being facilitated through a different office versus ultimately a planning commission that may be joined. So I think there are far more examples of having joint planning commissions than there are maybe having the administrative work being done. So I want to bifurcate that a little bit because I think it's an important nuance for the conversation. But I as Sarah mentioned, I think that's a good discussion that we should have, but keeping that sort of perspective on it.
I have a lot more comments and thoughts to share, but I want to hold those until we've had public comment.
Commissioners, other questions for Clarion or staff at this time?
I have one more around, so we've had a lot of conversations around data centers of late, and
Where I go like this, la 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 la.
We had a work session around data centers, and we had postponed some of our conversations around a moratorium till after this final conversation. And I think one of the pieces that I'm not necessarily seeing in this particular review is maybe anything around that particular piece. And so I guess maybe I was thinking I might see something in here that would lean in that particular direction that might inform us when we got to the next work session or discussion around data centers. So I'm kind of just curious if you've learned anything in your conversations or discussions with the stakeholders in regards to either battery storage or data centers, anything in that particular sector.
Dive in. Did you want to say something first, Sean? Yeah.
Sure. Although the report doesn't go into data center, it doesn't go into any use specifically. I just want to clarify that. It does speak to the notion of a prohibited use table, or at least not necessarily a table, but having prohibited uses. So as you can see in the report, there are some examples here locally. Miami County is I think the one that's referenced specifically in here, and a few others that do restrict uses based off of, again, what they're doing. Hazardous waste, I think, was one in particular. Where I also kind of want to go with that a little bit is sort of the old drum, which is that it comes back to infrastructure. Without getting into too much of 100 years ago with planning and zoning, there was a planning is rooted, or I should say zoning is rooted in an old court case that kind of looks at things from a health perspective. Where are you placing things based off of their impact on health? So again, I think that's the point of this report, is to look at things fundamentally through that lens and not necessarily being prescriptive with data centers or meat packing plants or anything. Again, those are big policy level conversations that ultimately we would want you all to weigh in. The public obviously needs to weigh in on that as well. So I'm not sure if I'm butchering this any more than I need to, but
No, that was
please go ahead.
That was, it's a good news, bad news conversation. So we would need policy guidance, right? So we're working with a county in Colorado right now that's okay with some data centers. And so we have a questionnaire we put together. I think we do something with data centers every day right now. And so we've asked, do you want to regulate this? Do you want to regulate this? Do you want to regulate this? The thing that we're seeing is, because this is such a big issue across the country, we're seeing regulations change very regularly. Do we regulate it based on size or how much energy it uses, or whether or not it's connecting to our grid? Is it near a military installation? What's the fire hazard? So, I agree with Sean completely. You would need to jump the yes, no hurdle and then walk down the path of, if it's, closer to an urban part of the county, what does it look like? If it's, out in a less urban part, and like Weld County, Colorado, which is very, it's urban and rural, they just said no data centers in ag zoning. So we're seeing a lot of different things going on. I think we're of the wait and watch mind. Just give it some time if you can. But if you feel forced to make a decision, it needs to go policy first and then regulations. If you decide to go down that path, that could be one of the stopgap regulatory measures that you do right off the bat.
Okay, because I guess I thought maybe I would see it in here listed as one of the policy needed line items. And then when we think about, because I know, Sean, you mentioned like from a health perspective. So when we think about either like fire, water, hearing, some of those health related effects, would have thought that maybe that would have shown up here from a improving safety or infrastructure perspective.
Commissioner Anderson, if I could offer to you sort of my perspective about how these conversations have been sort of threaded together, right? The work session that we had initially to review with zoning and code staff about text amendment process around data centers and battery energy storage systems, and we made the decision to have those as two separate and distinguished conversations, and the data centers being one that we don't have any draft regulations for, right? And that it's very much in infancy in a much bigger conversation. What I recall about our how we sort of I guess connected that conversation to this was specifically around this idea of a prohibited uses table, and the fact that our current zoning and codes, our code doesn't have prohibited uses expressly laid out. And therefore, as part of this diagnostic review, I think there was some anticipation based on where that process was then, that perhaps there could be some recommendations around land use mapping, the prohibited uses as a possible consideration to incorporate into codes, which could make things more clear for us at times, and that's not a tool we've worked with, and that these infrastructure needs and these recommendation around really having land standards and division that is reflective of infrastructure capacity and infrastructure need, that those themes and those conversations are highly influential to the conversation about what Douglas County will or won't do to ban or regulate data centers. So my perspective was that the sort of waiting on this, what I expected or hoped to see in this was a clearer recommendation about whether or not, or some guidance perspective about other communities' usage of permitted or unpermitted uses, and whether or not that was something we would consider being a change. And to Commissioner Willie's question earlier, I think that a next sort of layer in this process for us as we go down the road after receiving this diagnostic review, which I heard, was described as a point in time document that captures what things are as now. And now that the commission has approved budget for redrafting and to go out to RFP for that there are about 1 million conversations to be had between now and then. The data center one, I think, is going to continue to, it's going to come back to us in some specific ways later this year, I hope, with some more information and research that we asked to get back from staff, as well as informed by the sort of the pathways that we might be headed down based on this diagnostic review and these preliminary recommendations. And then depending on whether, or, depending on who it is that is selected to do that future drafting, perhaps we will be having a conversation about whether or not some things should be triaged, whether or not there are some pieces or recommendations such as a land use map being developed, or a non-permitted uses table being developed that we could theoretically prioritize and try to incorporate sooner. So I think, to the comments of both Clarion consultants and staff, and commissioners, I've heard that it's a big policy conversation that I think we're probably going to end up having in a variety of different ways, and it is touched by and informed by this document, I think. But there's a lot more about it to unpack. But I believe that we will be looking back to this document and the fact that there's recommendations around infrastructure, capacity needs, and those non-permitted uses that we will likely be looking to a lot as a commission when we come back to those more in the weeds, nitty-gritty discussions with zoning and code staff and the community.
Thank you. I agree. I think this document has a lot in it that will help inform those conversations. I think I was just kind of hoping for maybe some of those non-permitted uses around maybe data centers to kind of show up in here so that it would maybe help inform some of those policy conversations that we're going to have. Knowing that, or at least for me, a preference is around a moratorium while we are developing that particular policy. Knowing that, at least for me, that there's a preference around a moratorium while we're actually developing the policy. So yeah, I'll just say that.
So I'll have more comments, but did we want to do public comment first?
I want to double check. Are there any other questions for Clarion or staff at this time? Okay, thank you so much for your work and for the presentation. With that, we'll go ahead and open this item up for public comment. Is there anybody who wishes to provide public comment on item 4.3 for tonight? Come on up, John.
John M. 66049. Just want to make sure you're all aware that the city had a very late night session on data centers and went quite deep with the ask from the commissioners for staff to bring back a 2-year moratorium and some other details associated with the topic for the purposes of what you all been discussing here. So I just want, sounds like you are. So that's all.
Anybody else? Sorry, I almost felt a sneeze going on, which would have not been fun for anybody. All right, and any raised hands there? Okay, we'll go ahead and close public comment and bring it back to the commission for further comments. And this is an item that's just for informational purposes only tonight.
Well, I really appreciate the deep dive, and for my part, will spend a lot more time with this document. I'm not done with it. There's quite a bit to unpack here, and some of the pieces I've interacted with in the past and other pieces are new. So I want to make sure that I'm on my own, gleaning what I can from the document that's given. And I think that there are tools and things to learn from other communities, and just putting our own plans side by side and seeing some of those conflict points. I think there's just a lot here that's important that I'm really glad to have. But I feel like it did tackle the things that I have noticed and observed as pain points from the decision-making here. We don't have enough conversations with our rural water districts and that rural utility use. We're only just beginning to have conversations about like Kansas State Fire Code and things that intersect with land use there. So that I certainly felt we've really struggled with like the outdated area plans that are kind of on the edges of the city of Lawrence, but have some unincorporated area and they're outdated. So it's this chicken and the egg. Do we wait until they're updated to make a decision? Do we make a decision and then update them? So I kind of just recognizing that it pulled a lot of those pieces out. I didn't expect it or you know, at this point to have recommendations for specific policies at all. I think it's really more about learning what we have, learning more deeply what we currently have, and then triaging some things to work on. And then those are discussions for us to have. It was not within the scope of what we were asking. And this was a lot in the scope that we were asking for. And then that next step will be kind of directed by both us and our public about what pieces to tackle and how. So I just feel like I have a lot to learn from what's in here and a lot to kind of process about what you know, as my part is, you know, one of the five of us, like what I'd like to see us digging into and spending time with, because there's a lot to choose from.
Some sort of general comments. I heard Commissioner Willie just there use triage, right? We said that, and this is a diagnostic. I'm very excited to have this tool so that we can start having focused conversations about where we want policy applied. I think in some ways we've leaned back on the regulations to say, well, just figure it out. And the CUP tool is we've used that to sort of address challenges as they come. Is that the best way to do it? I think that's a good conversation for us to have. You know, it may be the best tool to do it because it's temporary. It's not permanent. A zoning change, that has a lot more weight to it. So if we start creating, you know, future use tables, that has a larger impact over a larger period of time. I hope we can identify some things, and it sounds like Commissioner Anderson, and I know there's lots of discussion around what we need to triage, you know, right away. But I also think some of the things that I saw in here are more lifestyle changes, you know, how we think about the unincorporated and how it interacts with these other communities. That is a very deep and long conversation that is not something I think we're going to be able to do by even us singular. I mean, we're going to have deep conversations with our incorporated cities to talk about. I love the stuff about annexation, and I think it's going to be a really tough conversation to have because the way we're designed right now is cities get to decide. We can weigh in, but this is I'm not even sure it's a recommendation. It's just this is a way you could do it, right? And I think that's the conversation we need to have as a commission. That's the conversation we need to have as a community on where does that authority come from? And who is that? I really appreciated hearing that sometimes when it goes to the planning commission, we have one set of rules or one set of regulations we're applying to something. And sometimes I think it's hard for planning commissioners to know where to make that switch. We've got to make it clearer for them because sometimes when it's come to us, it's been clunky because I think they've been applying a different set of regulations to the item. So I see this as exciting and I see it as really challenging because I think these are some really meaty conversations that we're going to need to have but really important.
I agree because this is a very thorough document and it is filled with key policy recommendations. I mean, every other page is filled with at least 3 to 5 policy recommendations that you have suggested to us based on your thorough analysis. And we can take them or leave them, and we can edit them or work with staff to determine how we want to partner with our communities to address them. And so to your point, Commissioner Kelly, these are going to be very difficult conversations depending on the direction that we want to go. And they will require a lot of collaboration and a lot of community conversation to determine the direction that we want to go as a community and how we want to grow together and the direction that we really want to take for our future. Because these are not small changes. These are big changes for our community and for our unincorporated areas. And it's not to the points that and conversations we've been having over the last couple of days. It's not 1 year, it's not 2 years. I don't think this is 3 years. It might even be, I don't know, 5 years. And to, points that you all have been making over the last couple of days when it comes to making all these changes with the use tables. These kinds of changes, I understand, will take quite some time. So, and just those community convenings, stakeholder convenings to this level is going to take a lot of time. And I want to call Carl and team out again. I know it was the sustainability team, but many of you, when you and Sean, when you all did the Wakarusa plan, I mean, I just think that was such a great engagement that you all did. And so I want to mention that again, because I just think that those types of conversations really allow the community to come out and engage and put their stamp, their fingerprint on the work and really touch it and engage and have their voice in it. And so if those types of engagements and stakeholder input is how we can really begin to kind of get people engaged in this work and bring them out, then I think that'll also help us move along this particular timeline and get people engaged in what this might look like moving forward, because we really don't know what it's going to look like. So thank you for your work. And Sean, thank you for your work.
I'd like to give Tanya and Carl or whoever a chance to, if you don't mind coming up, to just respond to these are plans and codes that you work with intimately and that we see on occasion when it comes to us. What were your thoughts as you got this diagnostic, and did you find that things that surprised you or things that you kind of expected that we would be talking about?
Sorry, there we go. Tanya Voigt, Zoning and Codes Director. I thought Patrick's comment was really interesting when he said how challenging the document is, how technical it is, how complex it is. I think we actually live in that every single minute of every single day. So the document, to actually put it into words and identify possible solutions or possible ways to implement change to kind of get us out of that is very refreshing and makes me very happy. And I really look forward to the work. I do think the work will be challenging, but I think we're actually already there. Earl, do you have anything to add?
That was great. The only thing I would add is when I first saw the document, I was excited. Like, this is great work as I started reading through it, and the Clarion team was excellent to work with. That was my reaction.
You must be in the right line of work then, because not everyone would feel that way. And in terms of the question of tackle all at once or triage different pieces, where there's some that really stood out to you as like, this needs to happen sooner rather than, I mean, I know that all needs to happen, but kind of those top emergencies.
I'm guessing we all have a little bit different opinions on that. My personal opinion would be to tackle the things that we think are relatively small, but that would make a really big impact in our day-to-day work. Like even just tying in the conversation of infrastructure and roads into a rezone, just that one thing alone will make our jobs so much more simplified. And it's such a small change in the grand scheme because we need to be looking at that already. We're just not looking at it at the front end. We're looking at it after a development or a rezone's already been approved.
I certainly felt that one in particular, the traffic piece, because it comes to us and it's a question of, well, how many neighbors came to tell us they hate it versus how many didn't? And how do people feel about dust? And it would be much nicer to have some standards that we could reflect to that maybe were just figured on early on. So yeah, I think there's some pieces like that.
I think, like the future land use map, That's a really big conversation. That would be something that would be great to get started, but understand that probably would not be implemented real quickly.
One of the pieces that kind of surprised me was pulling out like our zoning districts because, well, we updated them not that long ago and they were very specific to our community and community needs with a lot of public engagement. Did that piece surprise you, or was it kind of a new look to say, okay, maybe there are some things?
A couple of them I was pretty excited about. I think the commercial ag district is just kind of enhances the work that we're already in. You know, we have a lot of ag uses that are just allowed by right in an ag district. But when you get to the point where you're not specifically growing the agricultural product and say it's seed storage and you're just hauling seed in, or something that isn't associated with growing, that gets a little bit more tricky because sometimes you guys will see those site plans because we'll ask really kindly for them to site plan. But then there's the question of, do they actually legally need to? And I think getting them in a district that they also can make big financial investments. A CUP is a big problem for commercial and industrial businesses because what they end up doing is they need the guarantee that they can always be there. And so when you're investing millions and millions of dollars into a business, a lot of loan companies and investors don't want something that you can remove that time limit on, or that you can get a complaint about, take it back to the commission and say, oh, we changed our mind. We don't want that use there anymore.
Thank you. I think we'll have more conversations in the future.
One of the things that's churning around in my head is, you know, and Commissioner Willie, you probably have some experience with the number of conversations that were like, okay, do we need to look at the comprehensive plan on the whole? And I think my recollection was there was a lot of sort of resistance to do that because it just has such a large impact on the decisions that we make. But this does feel like some of those early conversations before we got to the rewrite of Horizon 2020, like, yeah, maybe we need to start talking some of these things in a bigger context. So, you know, I'm not saying this is a great idea, but instead of it being the Lawrence Douglas County Comprehensive Plan, it also involves Baldwin and Eudora and Lecompton and maybe Edgerton as well, you know, because that's really what Clarion is saying, is that we've got to have better, you know, relations, agreements, understanding about that UGA, not just around the city of Lawrence, but also the city of Eudora. I mean, that's and the city of Baldwin. What is their plans as they build out infrastructure so that we're not looking at a cluster development just out, you know, 10 miles outside that suddenly gets pulled in. So that is way down the line, but I will say I'm hearing sort of rumbling. I'm hearing some things that are coming back to me like, oh, these are some of the things we were talking about. And some of us were pushing like, let's rewrite 2040. And staff was like, hold on. Like, that's a huge process.
Conversely, I could also see if it's a Douglas County plan in conversation with the other community. Like it maybe it's all together, maybe it's separate, but that is probably the after the 2040 timeframe. But this is the time to think about what feels useful in those conversations. I do remember a moment, you know, hearing from the city of Eudora and how they were doing their urban growth area, and it was like light bulbs went off. Like, why didn't we talk about that? So I just think there are great conversations to be had. And in terms of plans, I was also kind of excited and interested to see that, like, why is Edgerton on the list? Oh, look, because it's planning into, you know, Douglas County, and we hadn't had that conversation, or I hadn't been part of that conversation. And even, you know, Lecompton's 20-year plan was due 5 years ago. And so just it's a ripe time to have those conversations. And so I come back to the triage because there's so many pieces and directions we could go in that are important. What is needed in the near term versus will require longer term investments in relationships and conversations.
I think that's something that, you know, I like process and process. What's the next step in the process? You know, perhaps 60 days or so, maybe 75. We could schedule a work session to, you know, that will give commissioners time to digest the document and kind of think about what your top priorities are. Staff can digest it, think about, because as we begin to scope sort of what does phase 2 look like, get that kind of feedback from the commission and staff and help maybe to create some sort of, how do we narrow this down a little bit and what do we do next and how do we approach it? And that would be key. We would need that before we would do phase 2. So we can look for a work session time somewhere in that time frame and just maybe kind of begin the dialogue.
Yeah,
Continue the dialogue.
I love the idea of a work session because you guys were picking out little, pieces that were identified, and I could provide a bunch of examples and context, that maybe, just like how we are dealing with it in the real world or challenges that we face in the office. While it's providing a recommendation, it maybe doesn't give the context of how we're facing it.
And I wonder, because a work session is such a small amount of time, if that's the time to identify things we want to ask for that from you and how you then come bring back or send a email or report or something that details some of that, because I know we won't be able to get all of those pieces back from you within an hour.
Absolutely. I think this would just be the start or the continuation of the conversation.
See many work sessions in our future about zoning and codes, friends. Well, any other questions for staff that have bubbled up for you, commissioners or Clarion? I think we've had some really great discussion, and it does seem like a really helpful and comprehensive document for us to be working from. So I'm excited about all the future conversations.
Thank you, commissioners.
Thanks for being here. Thank you, Clarion. We appreciate y'all. Elizabeth and Gabby. Sorry, I do know your names. Let me not call you by your company name. All right, commissioners, that concludes our business agenda for the evening. Next on our agenda is always appointments, but I don't believe we have any queued up. So I think we can just move right on to Sarah's memo and Commissioner Miscellaneous.
Thanks, commissioners. An updated memo is in your packet. We've continued to add some dates coming up through the rest of the summer. Mid-America Regional Council is conducting a survey regarding World Cup and transportation. So if you want to fill that out, you can, or we hope the public will that maybe travel. We'll do that as well. Also want to give the commission an update on the H&H assessment of the Wakarusa River. There's a link on that. So if you want to check some of those pieces out, you can. We've got some information on the Wakarusa Visioning Plan coming in a few weeks. Commissioners, next week, we do have a 4:00 session on our capital improvement program. So we'll be here at 4 for that. And then after that, on the 29th, we are not meeting. That's all I have for you, commissioners. Stand for any questions.
Thanks, Sarah. Any other items, commissioners?
How are we doing on the Haskell thing?
Well, as I spoke with you recently, Commissioner Dorsey, I'm still working to have more stakeholder conversations, which has been challenging in some ways. I've had a few conversations with specific staff that I know that work on campus to get some varied perspectives, community members, trying to do some outreach to Board of Regents. I've had a good conversation with Mayor Finkeldye, where I believe both of us are of the opinion that if we are to write any sort of letter to members of Congress on behalf of the community, that we want to understand what the clear ask is. And right now it's not particularly clear, other than we need something to help save the accreditation. And I am trying to get a better grasp on what the congressional committees that are talking about the Haskell Indian Improvement Act, how much they're talking about the accreditation issue. So I'd say still a work in progress. I don't want to draft something or send something off that doesn't have a tangible, concrete ask. But you'll be the first to know if I hear any good ideas from any of these conversations. I'm really hopeful about Board of Regents in particular, and kind of want to follow their lead as much as possible as the entity that's doing a lot of the advocacy work for the university. Otherwise, commissioners, I'll just share an update. Commissioner Willie will be in charge of running the meeting next week. While I'm away, I'll be here virtually, but am tacking on a few days of extra travel after the NACO conference concludes next week. So I'll be leaving for that tomorrow and hope to have I will have a bunch of information downloaded into my brain and will do my best to pull some things out to synthesize for you all and maybe have some interesting materials to share on the other end of that. Anything else for the good of the order?
Yeah, I wanted to throw this out. As John mentioned, the city commission approved a 2-year moratorium on data centers last night. Would the other commissioners find it helpful if we had an official moratorium for a similar period?
I think as we've left it is we have a moratorium in place now. After this conversation, we can come back and determine if, I think we need more policy direction from you before we would have that conversation, but you have a moratorium in place right now. The reason why Lawrence had to do it the way they did it is because their code currently allowed for data centers. Your code does not. So we have a moratorium in place right now.
Does it specifically say we don't allow data centers?
It doesn't speak to them. So it doesn't allow things that aren't spoken to. So it doesn't allow things that you don't have regulations for. We can come back and have more conversation about that, but you have a moratorium in place right now. And I thought we were clear about that when we had our work session.
Well, I thought last time you said it would come back up when Clarion was here.
Well, that was tonight.
Yeah.
So hopefully we can give us a little time and we will come back with some additional information as to how you would, some policy direction on how you'd like to codify that.
Okay.
Or what policy directions you want to give. I don't want to suppose that we're necessarily in that direction. But I think what was helpful about Clarion tonight was you learned that there are a variety of tools in place that you could do that with. So that was why we wanted to have this conversation with Clarion. There's a lot of ways to do that. You could have a prohibited use table, or you could say you're going to prohibit it in some places. So we wanted to have that kind of structural conversation tonight, and then to inform the policy decision as to which direction you want to go.
And then for our moratorium, what is the main difference? Because we have I think the way that you clarified it was that we have a de facto moratorium.
Right.
And so what is the difference between our moratorium and
what the city did?
Yeah, I mean, 'cause I know you said that we don't have, because we currently do not
our current code does not allow for data centers.
Right.
Full stop.
Okay.
Right now. So I don't need a moratorium because I don't allow for it.
So
that's why it's
so
de
if you
facto?
decided you wanted to start allowing them in some smaller cases, we would need to have regulations that allow for them. The city of Lawrence regs allowed for them. So they had to have a moratorium because they were allowed for. So it's the opposite day of where we are.
We're
if that
opposite
makes
day.
sense.
So if they're not allowed, they're already banned, right?
I guess you could say, I don't like the word ban because there's lots of legal issues associated with the word ban.
They're not allowed.
But they're currently not allowed. How about
So
that?
if someone were to come to staff and say, I want to do X, and we have a de facto moratorium.
We would say we do not have regulations that allow for that.
Okay.
Right
and
now.
that's full stop.
So
Right
there's
now.
no process to process the application at this time
Yeah.
because
Okay.
it's not allowable use. So what I tell people is until and unless it's an allowable use, there's nothing for staff to do with any prospective application that might come forward. If there was a speculative development in the unincorporated area for any type of data center, if staff, heard what the request on the face was and determined that that is not a currently identified allowed use, until and unless we decide that it would be an allowed use, and then we set regulations around that, there is no process for staff to follow, so it's dead in the water.
Okay. So it's just full stop. Sorry, we don't have allowable use. We don't have an intake for this.
Right.
That's it.
No process. And then, to Sarah, to just put a further point on Sarah's point about the city's need to do an explicit, drafted moratorium is because in their updated land use regulations, data centers became an allowed use that was already in the document in certain land use tables. And so they had to do explicit work in order to override that essentially and put a time stamp on it. Whereas we're in a situation with a de facto moratorium and a lack of process. And until and unless we decide to create a process, there's no data centers in unincorporated Douglas County.
So
We currently don't ban other uses. We don't have a unprohibited use table. So I can't call it a ban because I don't have a non-prohibited use table. So we're back around again to talk about Clarion. So if you wanted to have a prohibited use table, you could add a bunch of things to it, like hazardous material factories, like they talked about. But it would be more than just data centers.
So is Carl developing regulations or not?
I think he is gathering information and research, and then we're going to come back to commissioners and get more direction. He is not drafting specific regulations at this time.
Yeah, my understanding from after concluding our work session and the sort of pathways that we came to at that time was that there was not active drafting of regulations. Further research was going to be done. There would be potentially some further drafting of and recommendations to come back to us about battery energy storage systems because we created, a separation there. But that for data centers, that was going to be a larger conversation, which at the direction of the commission, we'd have zoning and codes staff come back and talk with us about further research because we asked a lot more robust questions than since it's in such an infancy stage of research. And we wanted to understand where we might be headed with our zoning and codes updates. And so I expect personally, I'm interested in another work session potentially, or, an informational session where we learn more about the research thus far and any ideas generated amongst staff about where we might head next. But until and unless we have those regulations drafted, which we don't even have staff working on drafting them, it's not an option.
Yeah, our first priority was the battery energy storage from that work session. So that's where we were headed next.
Since we already have those regulations drafted to a point under a certain code chapter, that is a little bit more low hanging fruit and something to sort of clean up because it's actively allowed to some degree.
What I found helpful about this evening was the number of tools that we need to put in place, whether it's an infrastructure regulation, I think that is a key one there, or whether it's a non-permitted use table. We couldn't really speak at our last work session to the tools that we had available if that was our purpose. And so I think we're getting better equipped to have the discussion if there's a certain direction that we want to go.
I'm very excited about the infrastructure conversation. We have a lot of different entities that manage our infrastructure. They all operate a little bit differently, and they often don't talk with each other and share best practices and kind of move into the modern sphere. So really the conversation that Clarion pulled together with like our rural water districts may have been one of the first times in a long time that they've been in the same room to have conversations at all. And that needs to happen. I'll tag this on as a separate update, but it relates to this, that I had a conversation with the Kansas Office of Broadband Development. It's a follow-up conversation to where we were a couple of years ago. One of the things I asked is like, what can we be doing to have more applicants come forward and try and serve our rural residents with rural broadband? And they said, we really need an infrastructure map that we can count on because it's so expensive when you hit those lines or infrastructure and they don't have a comprehensive map, or we didn't have a comprehensive understanding of where everything was. I don't think that's specific to Douglas County. I think that's kind of everywhere serving rural broadband or rural infrastructure. And that was a point that when this conversation came back up, I'm like, this dovetails into other things that we care about too.
Right. Good conversation, commissioners. Any other items for the good of the order today? Okay, well, I guess we'll be taking a week-long break from each other. So, after so many days in here together. All right, we are adjourned. Have a good night, everybody.